I still remember the way the room went quiet, as if someone had turned the volume down on an entire life. It was Evelyn's 75th birthday party, and every corner of her grand dining room sparkled with gold streamers, candles, and laughter. My daughter Lily stood out in her simple black dress, her long dark hair pinned back just the way she liked it, her hands clutching a small red box. She didn't look nervous. She didn't even look at me. She kept her eyes locked on Evelyn, who was holding court at the head of the table, smiling as people toasted her, oblivious to the storm about to break. I could feel my chest tightening because I already knew what was coming. Lily stepped forward with such calm, it almost scared me, her heels clicking on the hardwood, the box steady in her fingers. The conversations faltered as she reached the head of the table. A few relatives glanced up confused, and Evelyn finally noticed her standing there, waiting. Lily placed the red box in front of her and spoke, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "Dad said I could give this to you if you ever called me a mistake again." Everything stopped. You could hear forks hitting plates, glasses being set down mid-toast. Evelyn blinked her painted smile, freezing her fingers, hovering over her napkin, as if she didn't understand what had just been said. But Lily didn't flinch. She stood there, shoulders squared, waiting for Evelyn to open it. The silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. Someone cleared their throat at the other end of the table, but nobody dared speak. Evelyn finally gave a little laugh, the kind you let out when you're trying to pretend nothing's wrong. She reached for the box with a shaky hand, glancing around the table as though someone else might save her from opening it. I held my breath. My hands were in my lap, gripping the fabric of my dress so hard I thought it might tear. All the months of quiet pain, the swallowed words, the way Lily had learned to lower her head and pretend not to hear all of it, had led to this moment. Evelyn peeled back the red lid slowly, still trying to keep her composure, but I saw the way her knuckles turned white. Then as soon as she looked inside, the sound that came out of her didn't even sound human. A raw, sharp scream that sliced through the air, louder than anything else in the room. People gasped. Someone stood up. Others just sat there staring, too stunned to move. But I stayed where I was watching Lily. She didn't move either. She just stood there, looking Evelyn dead in the eye, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one shrinking back. She was the one everyone else couldn't look away from. When I first met David, I didn't believe someone like him could exist. I was a single mom in my mid-30s, exhausted from years of trying to be everything for Lily while feeling like I wasn't enough for anyone else. She was 3 then, with wild curls and big searching eyes clinging to my leg every time we went anywhere. David didn't flinch when he saw that part of me. He knelt down the first time we introduced them and asked her name like she was the most important person in the room. I'd been so used to people pretending she wasn't there, or smiling politely, but keeping their distance once they realized I had baggage. David didn't see her that way. He took her hand when we crossed streets, he knelt by her booster seat to help with the buckle, and he learned all the names of her stuffed animals. She started calling him Daddy on her own, and I don't think I've ever seen him prouder than the day he signed the papers to make it official. For a while, it felt like we were finally a real family. When I met his mother, Evelyn, I wanted so badly for her to like me. She hugged me the first time we visited, and even crouched down to Lily's level, telling her what a pretty little girl she was. I clung to that moment like it was proof things could work. Over the next few months, she invited us to dinner, complimented my cooking, and even sent Lily a birthday card. She called me dear and laughed at David's old stories as if I belonged in them too. But little things started to shift. At first, I thought I was imagining it. She'd forget to include us in group messages about family events. When we came over, she'd make a big show of hugging her other grandchildren first, and then turning to Lily like she'd just remembered she was there. She started calling Lily David's girl instead of her granddaughter, usually with a soft laugh, like it was just a quirk. And Lily noticed. Kids always notice. I told myself I was overthinking that she was just old-fashioned or forgetful, but it ate at me every time. At Christmas, the other kids got matching pajamas and toys from their wish lists, while Lily opened a plastic jewelry kit that looked like an afterthought. At Easter, her name wasn't on the egg hunt list. I told her, "Grandma loves you in her own way, sweetheart," but every time the words came out of my mouth, they felt thinner. One afternoon, when Lily was about 7, she climbed onto my lap after we got home from one of those long, awkward dinners. She held a piece of leftover cake and asked quietly if she was really Grandma's granddaughter. I froze. My heart sank, but I forced a smile and said, "Of course she is." Then she tilted her head and whispered, "So why doesn't she ever say so?" I didn't have an answer. That night, I cried into my pillow after she fell asleep. David found me in the dark and sat beside me, quiet but tense, as if he didn't know what to say either. Part of me wanted to believe this was just a rough patch, that Evelyn would come around once she really got to know Lily. But deep down, another part of me already knew better. That kind of coldness doesn't come from not knowing someone. It comes from deciding they don't count. Over the years, it only got harder to explain to Lily why she was always just outside the circle, why she never got invited to the sleepovers with her cousins, why her name was missing from handmade ornaments on the tree. I watched her grow quieter during family visits, watched the light in her eyes dim just a little each time we walked through that front door. And every time I looked at her across the table, I felt the same question staring back at me. Why am I not enough for her? That question never stopped echoing in my head, even when I told myself I was being mature by keeping the peace. Even when I smiled and said thank you for the cheap bracelet Evelyn handed her, while gushing over the expensive gifts for everyone else. Even when I held Lily's hand in the car ride home and told her it didn't matter, we loved her more than enough. Because I could see it in her face every single time. It did matter. And it hurt more than she ever said. It didn't happen all at once. It built up slowly, year after year, in moments so small you could almost convince yourself they didn't matter. But they did. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering left a little crack in Lily that I could see but never quite fix. Evelyn never called her by her name. She'd smile across the room and say, "David's girl," in this strange tone, like she was reminding everyone she didn't really belong. The other kids were always fussed over. New bikes, tablets, matching Christmas sweaters with their names embroidered in gold. Lily got things that looked like they came from a clearance bin. Once it was a flimsy bracelet with beads that fell off before we got home. Another time, it was a lavender-scented candle that smelled like chemicals. She always said thank you anyway. She always smiled, even though I could feel her fingers tighten around mine under the table. One Christmas Eve, Evelyn made a toast, raising her glass and calling out each of her grandchildren by name. She listed what made them special, how proud she was of them. Then she looked right past Lily, as if she wasn't even there. The words caught in my throat, but I forced myself to smile because it seemed easier than making a scene. David's jaw tightened as he set his glass down, but he didn't say anything either. Neither of us did. I hated myself for that later. I hated how we both just let it happen because we didn't know what else to do. After everyone went home that night, Lily sat on her bed, still wearing her velvet dress, spinning the cheap bracelet between her fingers. She asked me softly if she was really part of the family or just visiting like a guest. I told her of course she belonged. I told her she was ours. But deep down, I knew she didn't believe me anymore. The older she got, the better she got at hiding the hurt. By the time she was 14, she barely reacted at all. She'd sit through dinners like a ghost, quiet and polite, nodding, when Evelyn handed her something with that same fake smile. But I could see it in her eyes, that weight she carried every time we walked into that house. That last Thanksgiving was when everything broke. The table was crowded with food and noise. everyone laughing and passing plates back and forth. Lily sat quietly folding her napkin in her lap. Evelyn was pouring coffee for everyone when she leaned over and muttered to someone under her breath. I didn't even hear it at first, but Lily froze her shoulders stiff. I asked her later what Evelyn had said. Lily didn't even look up as she whispered it. She was a mistake from the start. My heart stopped. I felt hot and cold all at once staring at her as she stared at her hands. David sat at the end of the table staring straight ahead with his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. He didn't say anything. That silence was the worst part. Not just Evelyn's cruelty, but our silence that let it happen. I watched Lily swallow down her pride yet again, watched her straighten her back and pretend not to care. But I knew she did. I could see it written all over her face, even if no one else was looking. Every time Evelyn called her David's girl, every time she was handed another thoughtless gift, every time she was left out of family photos and inside jokes, another little piece of her chipped away. And all I could think was how much longer she could keep pretending it didn't hurt before something inside her broke for good. I sat there that night staring at my plate while David stared at the wall, and for the first time, I wasn't sure which one of us was failing her more. Him for staying silent, or me for letting him. Because by then, I knew we couldn't keep pretending this was okay. Not anymore. That night after Thanksgiving, the house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. Lily had already gone to her room, and I sat at the kitchen table staring at the half-empty pie dish, feeling like a stranger in my own home. David walked in without saying a word and set a small red box down in front of me. I looked at him confused, but he just nodded toward the hallway. He didn't sit down. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, his jaw tight, and told me he had put it together months ago. Inside, he said, were her adoption papers and a letter he'd written himself. He told me he was done pretending his mother hadn't crossed a line and that Lily deserved to have something in her hands when the moment finally came. Then he picked up the box again, walked down the hall, and tapped on her door. I followed him quietly and stood in the doorway as he sat on the edge of her bed. Lily was still dressed, her knees pulled up to her chest, her eyes blank as she stared at the floor. David held the box out to her and told her it was hers to keep. He said it was her choice when to use it, but if his mother ever said those words to her again, she didn't have to sit there and take it. Lily took the box slowly and ran her fingers over the lid, but she didn't say anything. She didn't cry. She just nodded once, like she'd already decided. The next few weeks passed without incident. We went to dinners and family gatherings like nothing had happened, but something in Lily had shifted. She carried the box with her every time. Sometimes I'd catch her checking her bag before we left, making sure it was tucked safely inside. She was quieter than usual, but there was something steadier in the way she held herself, like she was waiting for her chance. When Evelyn's 75th birthday rolled around, I didn't even want to go. I tried to come up with excuses, but Lily wouldn't let me. She laid out her black dress the night before and curled her hair that morning without being asked. When I asked if she was sure, she looked me straight in the eye and said she was. We arrived at Evelyn's house to the same polished spectacle it always was. White tablecloths, gold balloons, soft piano music in the background. Evelyn floated from guest to guest, all smiles, kissing cheeks, and accepting gifts wrapped in silk ribbons. When we walked in, she barely glanced at Lily before moving on to greet her favorite grandkids. At dinner, Lily barely touched her plate. She kept one hand resting on her bag on the chair beside her. I sat there in silence, watching her watch Evelyn. And then, like clockwork, Evelyn struck again. She leaned into one of the cousins and muttered with that same cruel little smile that Lily was never supposed to happen. I froze. The words hung in the air, sour and heavy, but before I could even open my mouth, Lily's fingers tightened around the bag. She slid the box out, set it on the table next to her, and sat up straighter. She didn't even look at me. She didn't need to. I knew exactly what she was about to do, and this time, I didn't stop her. I didn't even try. Lily waited until the last toast was given. The room was full of laughter glasses clinking, everyone showering Evelyn with words of love and praise, as if she were some kind of saint. I sat frozen, watching from my seat near the end of the table, while Lily kept her eyes steady on her grandmother. She didn't touch her dessert. She didn't look at me or David. Her fingers stayed on the little red box resting quietly on her lap. It was almost like she was counting down to the exact second she would stand. When she finally rose to her feet, the room barely noticed. Someone was telling a story about Evelyn's younger years. The cousins were giggling, and I could hear someone pouring more wine into Evelyn's glass. But then Lily stepped closer to the head of the table, her shoes clicking softly on the polished floor. The sound caught a few people's attention. The chatter slowed as heads began to turn toward her. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She placed the box on the table right in front of Evelyn's plate and straightened her back. The quiet came slowly spreading down the length of the table until only Lily's voice filled the air. If you ever call me a mistake again, this is for you. The weight of her words landed with a thud. Evelyn blinked at her confused, still holding her fork midair, as if she hadn't quite understood what was said. But the silence in the room made it clear everyone else had. The cousins stopped mid-bite. The aunts and uncles exchanged glances. I could feel my heart in my throat, every muscle in my body screaming to stand up, but I stayed in my seat because I couldn't look away from my daughter. Evelyn let out a brittle laugh, trying to push past the tension. Her hand reached for the box with a kind of false bravado, her perfectly manicured fingers hesitating just a second before she touched it. She glanced around the table as though waiting for someone to rescue her from this strange little challenge. No one moved. Lily didn't either. She just stood there, her hands at her sides. Her gaze locked on Evelyn's face, and there was nothing childlike in the way she stood now. There was something unshakable about her in that moment, and I realized she didn't just carry that box with her these past weeks. She carried herself differently. Like someone who finally understood her own worth. I could hear a clock ticking in the corner as Evelyn carefully lifted the lid, still wearing that forced smile that fooled no one anymore. The hush in the room deepened the kind of stillness that makes you feel like the air itself is holding its breath. Everyone was watching now. Everyone was waiting to see what was inside that little red box. Evelyn froze when she saw the photo on top. Her smile faltered, and she pulled it out with trembling fingers. The picture of David holding Lily on the day he adopted her, both of them smiling through tears, stared back up at her from the gold frame. The room stayed quiet. Not a single fork or glass moved as she set the photo down and reached for the envelope beneath it. Her hands shook as she unfolded the papers, her eyes scanning the legal document that left no doubt. David's name, her name, a judge's seal, the date. Lily wasn't just David's girl. She was his daughter by choice, by law, by every measure that mattered. Then she unfolded the letter, and her face changed as she read. At first, disbelief, then anger. Then something darker, something sharp and ugly. She dropped the paper like it burned her fingers and shot to her feet, her chair scraping hard against the wood. "You embarrassed me." Her voice cracked through the silence like glass breaking shrill and raw, her cheeks flushed with rage. Everyone around the table flinched at the sound. She turned on David, pointing a shaking hand at him, her words spitting out like venom. "How dare you humiliate me like this in front of my family?" David didn't even flinch. He stood up slowly, his shoulders square, his eyes locked on hers, and for the first time in years, I saw a steel in his expression that didn't waver. "No, Mom. You embarrassed yourself." Those words settled over the room like ash. Evelyn froze, her mouth still open, her finger still raised, but her fury seemed to drain into the silence. No one else dared speak. No one else moved. David stepped closer to her, then his voice low but firm enough for everyone to hear. "This is your doing. Every time you made her feel like she didn't belong. Every time you treated her like less. That's on you." Evelyn didn't respond. Her hands dropped to her sides, her chest heaving. She looked around the table, but no one came to her defense. Even the cousins kept their heads down, their forks resting on their plates, the echo of David's words filling the air like judgment. I glanced at Lily and saw something in her face I hadn't seen in a long time. Calm, steady. She stood there watching Evelyn crumble without flinching, her chin lifted just slightly, her eyes bright with a quiet strength. Evelyn finally turned, her heels clicking hard against the floor as she stormed out of the room, leaving her own birthday party in silence. The only sound that followed her was the faint creak of the door closing behind her. David looked back at Lily and gave her the smallest nod. She exhaled just once and returned to her seat. For the first time in years, she didn't sit small. She sat tall with her shoulders straight, and everyone at that table knew they'd just witnessed something they'd never forget. The days after the party were quiet. No phone calls came from Evelyn. No angry messages or half-hearted apologies. No invitations to another family dinner. At first, I expected some kind of retaliation, but the silence stretched on until it became clear. She wasn't coming back. For the first time in years, we didn't have to plan our holidays around her. We didn't have to tiptoe into her house, bracing ourselves for what she might say, or how Lily might be made to feel small. We decorated our own table-baked cookies, just the three of us, and it felt lighter somehow. There was no rush, no tension hiding under the surface. Just peace. I kept watching Lily in those early weeks, half worried she'd still carry the hurt with her. But something about her had shifted. She smiled more. She sat taller at the dinner table. She didn't ask about Evelyn even once, and she stopped checking the mailbox like she was waiting for a card that never came. It was like she finally let go of a weight she'd been dragging for far too long. One afternoon, a small padded envelope showed up with her name on it. She opened it at the counter, her fingers tugging at the paper, and inside was a simple silver bracelet with a heart charm. There was a note written in a careful, almost childlike hand. "Sorry Grandma was mean. You're my cousin forever. I used my own money." Lily read it twice, then slid the bracelet onto her wrist and didn't take it off for days. It sparkled in the sunlight when she reached for her books, when she set the table, even when she brushed her hair before bed. She never said much about it, but the little smile on her face told me what it meant. Someone in that family had seen her. Someone had chosen her. David didn't say much in those weeks either, but I caught him watching her sometimes. The way he looked at her when she laughed or when she reached over to help me stir the soup. It was the look of a man who finally knew he'd done something right. At night, I'd find him in her doorway leaning against the frame just to see her sleeping, the faintest trace of a smile on his face. I realized then that we hadn't really lost anything at all. We'd only let go of something that had been holding us back. The house felt warmer without Evelyn's shadow over it. The air felt easier to breathe. We stopped pretending. We stopped shrinking ourselves to fit into a place we were never truly welcome. Lily was no longer the quiet girl sitting at the corner of the table hoping for scraps of kindness. She carried herself differently now, with a quiet confidence that made me proud every time I saw her. The hurt was still there in some small way, but it no longer owned her. It no longer defined her. Sometimes I'd catch her glancing at the red box in her dresser, the one she'd carefully tucked away after that night. She never opened it again, but she kept it there as if to remind herself of how far she'd come. I think she understood better than anyone that some things don't need to be spoken anymore. We filled our days with new little traditions, baking cookies for the neighbors, watching old movies in our pajamas, driving out to see Christmas lights and singing along to the radio. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen watching Lily help David hang a strand of lights on the porch, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A quiet sense of ease. We hadn't lost a family. We'd simply stopped chasing what was never meant for us. And in the quiet of that realization, I finally felt free. Looking back now, I see things more clearly than I ever did in the moment. For so long, I believed that family was simply the people you were born to, that love was automatic and belonging was something you didn't have to fight for. But I was wrong. Family isn't just who shares your blood. Family is who chooses you every single day. I regret how long it took me to see that. I regret the years I let Lily sit quietly in rooms where she was made to feel like an outsider. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but what I was really doing was teaching her to accept less than she deserved. That will always sit heavy in my chest, knowing how much she carried before I finally stood behind her. But she taught me something too. She showed me what it looks like to stand up for yourself, even when your voice shakes. She reminded me that you don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes, all it takes is quiet strength and a refusal to shrink for someone else's comfort. Watching her lay that little red box on the table and claim her place in that room was one of the proudest and hardest moments of my life. If you are sitting there tonight feeling small in your own family, I hope you hear this. You do not have to earn their love. You do not have to beg to belong. If they cannot see you for who you are and love you fully, that says nothing about your worth. You are already enough. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve to take up space. Don't let anyone convince you that you are a mistake. You are not. You never were, and you never will be. I wish I had learned that sooner for myself. But if sharing this story helps you find your voice a little faster than I found mine, then maybe it was worth it. You are allowed to walk away from what hurts you. You are allowed to choose your own peace. Family is not who demands your loyalty without giving you love in return. Family is who shows up for you, who protects you, who sees you, even when others look away. And if you have even one person in your life like that, hold on to them with both hands, because they are your family. I will never forget the lesson my daughter taught me that night. She taught me that sometimes the smallest person in the room can carry the greatest strength, and she showed me that it's never too late to choose yourself. So if you need someone to tell you it's okay to stop settling, let it be me. You deserve more. You deserve better. And you deserve to feel at home wherever you are loved.